If you refine your reading comp approach more, if you get better at distinguishing sufficient versus necessary conditions, not reversing them, and being more clear on your mapping of the stimulus, you're going to get those score increases on the way to 170. This is Leah, and she's looking to go from the low 150s to a 170 and beyond in the next 2.5 months. My name is Steve Schwartz, and I've been teaching the LSAT for the past 20 years. Today, Leah's going to bring me her biggest LSAT challenges, and I'll help her address them as she looks to improve by 15-20 points. Where are you currently scoring right now?
Like 153, I think. I think my highest has been a 155.
And what's your ultimate goal score?
Really just however high I can get, but like a 170 would be awesome.
Okay, so ideally 170 plus. And how long do we have until your test?
I'm taking it September.
Okay, so we've got, at this point, about 10 weeks or 2.5 months, right?
Yeah, but I'm also applying for next fall, so I could take it later if I have to, like keep studying.
Okay, so you're open to pushing it back.
Yeah.
And how many hours per week are you able to put into your prep between now and September?
I'm putting right now like 20, 25 hours.
Okay, so that's a pretty good amount of time, maybe 3-4 hours a day. And what would you say are your biggest challenges or weak areas right now?
Sufficient assumption questions and must be true questions are really tough. And then reading comp in general is just really hard. I've always had like a rough time with reading. Like I've been in like reading classes and stuff like that. So yeah, I think it's mostly just like knowing what to do, but that plan has helped me a lot, so.
With the personalized study plan? You mentioned reading comp along with sufficient assumption and must be true. I'd say reading comp is going to be the highest leverage because it's a whole third of the test.
Yeah.
We want to make sure that you have a solid approach there that you feel confident in. What would you say is your current approach to reading comp?
Right now, I'm trying to just read the stimulus and then try to put it in my own words, like every sentence. And that's been helping, but I struggle a lot with putting it into my own words. And then also with that, I never can finish the last passage. I always run out of time.
Okay, so when you say putting in your own words, you mean like paraphrasing the passage sentence by sentence?
Yeah.
Okay.
Or if it's like an easier passage, I do just by paragraph.
And are you doing that under timed conditions as well?
I try not to, but then if I don't, I usually just get confused on what it's saying.
I will sometimes recommend rewriting or paraphrasing the entire passage in simpler language as an exercise, but that can become challenging under timed conditions just due to the time constraint. And so I might recommend saving that for more of your untimed review after the fact, but then during your practice tests or timed sections, you might try to reserve that only for the central or main idea. So if there's one key sentence where the author expresses their opinion, I would definitely want to get that down and be airtight, be solid on the meaning of that particular part. But for the details, the supporting examples, you may not need all of that.
Okay, so just for the actual test, like under timed, just mainly focus on the main stuff, not just every sentence.
Exactly. So if you want to leave the passage with one thing, you'd want that one thing to be the main point, the main idea, the central purpose of the passage. When you see the author expressing anything like that, anything global in nature, big picture, you want to slow down and absorb that thoroughly. But then anything that is supportive in nature or lists of examples and evidence, I would speed up there. Note where it appears so that you can go back and find it when you need to, but you don't need that on your initial read. Okay. And that could risk you getting bogged down.
Okay, so is like going back to the passage not like a bad thing? Because I read like you should like read it and then not have to go back and look and search because that takes time. So to spend more time on the passage than the questions?
Good question. So the answer is whatever works for you.
Okay.
So you have 10 weeks. You can experiment with that, but personally, I would find it difficult to read 450 words on a difficult, unfamiliar topic and not go back to it for anything.
Yeah.
Ideally, you don't want to have to go back to the passage for those general, global, big picture questions like what's the main idea, what's the primary purpose, what's the author's opinion, what's the tone. Like those are your orientation type questions. I would knock those out without going back. But then for the detailed questions or the more inferential questions that require a bit more reading between the lines, those I would go back for.
Okay, that makes sense.
The key to make that process happen quickly, though, is to note where the evidence appears so that you know exactly which part of the passage to go back to.
Okay, so if it makes like a claim, you just want to know where that evidence is. You don't really have to know what it is yet until you get to the questions, and you can go back.
Yeah, just because it's too many details on unfamiliar topics.
Yeah.
And so rather than trying to hold all of that in your head simultaneously, when the LSAT is deliberately designed to push past the limits of your typical working memory, I would say just note where the evidence is and then go directly to that part of the passage.
Okay, that makes sense.
And you can jot down after you read the passage a couple of key words that crystallize the main idea, that crystallize the author's opinion, so that you can go into the global questions with that in mind. A lot of people go into reading comp thinking they need to remember everything, every example, every name, every little transition word. And honestly, that's what keeps them stuck. What we talked about here is the shift from trying to memorize to trying to map. Instead of getting bogged down in every sentence, you want to read with intention. Your job is not to remember the entire passage, it's to walk away with a clear understanding of the main idea and a rough idea of where the different viewpoints and evidence live. And when you approach it this way, something really powerful happens. You stop feeling overwhelmed. You realize that going back to the passage isn't failure, it's strategy. And if you know where to look, you can find the detail you need without wasting precious seconds scanning. Now, what is your note-taking or highlighting approach like if you have one?
I usually just highlight like transition words. So if it's like however or therefore, I highlight those so that when I do go back, I know where it was in the passage. And then like people, if it is like, oh, so-and-so says this, then I highlight that person. Mostly just like main things that will tell me where to go when I go back to look.
Okay, and how's that working for you?
I think it helps me more because I agree, like, I can't remember 450 words in the passage without going back. And so I think it helps me go back and not take as much time because I know exactly where it is. And then also I think when I read, it helps me like really focus because I'm like actively highlighting and not just reading and then just like throwing it away, you know?
I'm glad that's working. Play with it. You don't need to be fixed on that exact method if you feel that it's not serving you,
Okay.
right? So definitely people are important to highlight because they are the advocates of different positions or different viewpoints. Transitional words like however or therefore may not be as impactful. Okay. Of course, however signals change in direction, therefore signals conclusion, but the LSAT reading comp section, I think, goes beyond keyword indicator words.
Yeah.
So you may find that limiting or distracting.
Okay.
One of the more subtle but important things that came up was how we highlight or take notes during reading comp. Most people default to highlighting words like however or therefore. And yes, those are transitions. But the LSAT doesn't reward you for catching transition words. It rewards you for tracking arguments. That means knowing who said what and how their views compare. So rather than marking every contrast word, focus on the structure. Highlight names, key positions, and anything that feels like a turning point in the argument. That's what'll actually help you when you go back to answer the questions. And it'll train you to spot what really matters, not just what feels safe to underline. If you're just getting started with your LSAT prep or you're looking for a quick refresher, you can grab your free Easy LSAT cheat sheet linked below this video. It's jam-packed full of concrete, actionable tactics you can take and apply to your LSAT prep right away for a quick score boost, and it's 100% free, so you can grab your copy below. And now, back to the show. So let's shift gears a bit and talk about logical reasoning. So you mentioned sufficient assumption and must be true, right?
Yes. Yeah, it's mostly like conditionals, but my last one-on-one tutoring, we went over those more in depth, which was helpful. So I've just been like doing drilling questions with sufficient assumptions. I think it's getting better, but I think my biggest mistake in the past with studying is I never like learned about what the question types were asking, and so that's been really helpful because Like something that really helped me with resolve the paradox was knowing that both the facts from the stimulus have to be in the answer choice. That was really helpful. And so like there's just like little things in each question type that has helped me.
Okay, so you're saying that you feel like you're on the right track, and as a result of your one-on-one sessions, getting more clear on what the question types are asking for. Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's talk about it a bit. What's your understanding at the moment of sufficient assumption, like what it's asking for?
I think it's just asking for that missing premise to get to the conclusion.
Yeah, that's fair to say. So it's a missing premise that will guarantee the conclusion if it's true, right? So when you combine the missing premise with the evidence, the two of them together are then sufficient to guarantee the conclusion all the way, making the argument work.
I just always confuse like sufficiency and necessity.
Yeah, so sufficiency is enough, and then necessity is required. So sufficient to the left of the arrow, necessary to the right of the arrow in terms of conditions. But then when it comes to assumptions, a sufficient assumption, if true, is enough to guarantee the argument. It could be more strong than is required, like having $100 is enough to buy a $1 item. You don't need to have $100 to buy a $1 item, but if you did, that would be more than enough and would certainly be enough.
Yeah.
Then in contrast, if you wanted to buy a $1 item, having a penny or the value of a penny is necessary, but would not be enough.
Yeah.
This comes up at least once a day in one of my coaching sessions with a student. Someone confuses sufficient with necessary and everything unravels from there. Now here's the simplest way I could put it. Sufficient is enough, necessary is required. If you're trying to prove a conclusion beyond any doubt, sufficient assumptions are what you're after. They guarantee the conclusion if they're true, even if they're stronger than what's required. The moment you lock in that distinction, a huge chunk of logical reasoning opens up. Suddenly, you're not just guessing at answer choices anymore. And by the way, if you're looking for a necessary assumption, that means you want what the argument needs in order to work, and choosing the choice that locks it in airtight.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense to me. It's just when you get to things you can't like logically think about in that way, because I like, let's say like I just don't know what the topic is, so I can't like logically think about it like that. Then it gets tough because you just have to use like the mapping and stuff. Yeah,
well, of course, our job is to logically think about it, right? But when it comes to conditions, sufficient assumption questions, you can, in some cases, diagram them. Diagramming might be useful in some cases, is what I'm saying here. And so if you see a stimulus or an argument that contains multiple conditional statements, it is possible that if you diagram the stimulus, the correct answer in the form of a new conditional statement, when combined with the existing evidence conditional, could then form a longer chain that guarantees the conclusion. So it almost becomes like a math problem.
Which I didn't know I was getting into math. Just kidding.
Right. I mean, it happens sometimes. It's not always the answer, but sometimes that is the path forward. In other cases, it could be that the correct answer to a sufficient assumption question is simply a broader version of the argument itself. So if we had, for example, Leah got a 180, therefore she's going to get into Harvard Law. If we said as a broader version of that, anyone who gets a 180 will get into Harvard Law, that would certainly guarantee the particular example of Leah, right?
Yeah. But is that like correct? Because, well, I guess it just doesn't work the other way around.
No, we're not going the other way here. The stimulus is the example of the particular individual. And we're looking to guarantee that example. And if we learned as new information in the form of a sufficient assumption, like a broader principle, that anyone who gets a 180 will get into Harvard Law, that new information in the form of a principle would then guarantee any particular example. The examples would fall within the umbrella. Might seem weird because it's so simple, but that is the case for a lot of these.
So that would be one of the answer choices?
Yeah.
Would be the broader
the broader principle. Okay. Yes. That's why being really clear on the question type, as you said earlier, is so important, because then the right answer won't seem weird. Even if the right answer seems too easy or too obvious, and like you're like, they'd never make it that straightforward. They can, and they do all the time. And because smart people overthink things, they get them wrong when they shouldn't.
Because some questions are like not like that at all, and then some questions are totally just so like, this of course is right. I'm like, this is too easy, and then I second guess. So sometimes it's correct.
Right. Well, I mean, our goal is to get you to the point where everything seems that easy,
Yeah.
but you don't second guess because it just becomes rote. It becomes automatic. We touched on a really common mental block. Thinking an answer is too obvious to be correct. The truth is, the LSAT is not trying to trick you into picking the wrong answer. It's trying to see whether you understand how arguments work. So yes, sometimes the correct answer will feel surprisingly simple, especially on sufficient assumption questions where the right choice often just restates or broadens the existing argument. That is not a trick. That is the test itself. And if you're constantly second-guessing yourself because the answer seems too easy, that's a sign you're on the verge of getting really good. You've just got to trust your logic. Now, you also mentioned must-be trues. Is that also a case where conditionals are the issue, or is it something else?
Yeah, I think it's all just like the diagramming. Because if I don't diagram, then I always accidentally switch them. But if I diagram it, it's fine. But I struggle with the diagramming on like really complicated ones. But I've worked on them more recently, and I think I'm getting more comfortable, but it's still a little bit confusing sometimes.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. I mean, diagramming is a tool, and it's okay to use it as much as you want right now because you have 10 weeks till your test. Over time, I'd look to reduce the cases in which you diagram, meaning that over time, you're going to do more and more of those in your head, like you'll be able to. And then you'll reserve diagramming only for the more complicated cases that push beyond what is reasonable for you to do in your head.
Yeah, because sometimes I can just, like, it's just like intuition, and I can, like, find the right answer. But then with really complicated ones, I get all jumbled.
What we're going to do over time is we're going to raise your capacity for what is intuitive. So you'll be able to do more and more things intuitively. It'll just be automatic, and then only the most difficult ones will you then want to resort to diagramming. And that's okay. If you want to diagram a handful or maybe 3 or 4 questions in a section, I have no issue with that. I just don't want you diagramming everything.
Yeah.
Because there are too many cases where diagramming becomes counterproductive or takes up too much time or is not actually useful. But you mentioned 2 of the only types where diagramming is useful: sufficient assumption and must be true, where diagramming is okay to use sometimes. Diagramming is like a wrench. It's super helpful in the right context, but completely unnecessary in other contexts. In this conversation, we talked about how diagramming is great to use for certain question types like sufficient assumption and must be true, but the key is you don't want to make it a crutch. Right now, if you're 10 weeks out, diagramming can be a great tool to slow down and see the logical structure of an argument. But your end goal should be to reduce your reliance on diagramming over time. You want to eventually internalize those conditionals so well that you could do most of it in your head. Save the diagramming for the super complex arguments, and that's how you build speed and accuracy over time. Hey, real quick guys, a lot of you have been asking me how you can be featured in one of these LSAT study breakdowns and get feedback on your approach. The only way is to join one of my LSAT coaching programs. You could check out the links below to find out more and to book a call with me and my team. We'd be glad to help you out. And now, back to the show.
Would you recommend, like, even when I'm drilling, to time the sections? Because I think timing is something that I struggle with a lot also, because it, like, stresses me out. Even if it's just, like, there, it just makes me anxious. And then I, like, read it really quickly, and then I skip through things. So would you recommend that even when I'm just practicing, to just keep timing myself? Or should I just practice until I get the stuff down and then time it?
Well, timing is important, but it only makes sense to time in certain contexts. So doing timed full sections is definitely a good thing to do. As a general benchmark for anyone like yourself who's aiming for 170 plus, I would aim to do the first 10 questions of logical reasoning in roughly 10 minutes because we know those are the easier ones.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't time a drill set of, say, 20 must be trues or 20 sufficient assumptions because those are a jumbled grab bag of questions.
Yeah.
And the difficulty of those could vary, and so we can't say how long that set should take.
Okay. Yeah, because it's harder as it goes on, right?
Exactly. So the pacing drill of first 10 in 10 minutes, it works because we know the first 10 are the easiest. Mm-hmm. And so to do those on average a minute per is fine. And then we're building up a time bank to apply to the tougher questions later in the section.
Okay.
Timing is stressful. And for some students, it becomes the main problem rather than the content of the questions themselves. What we talked about here is really useful. There's a time and place for timing. If you're doing a full logical reasoning section, yes, track your pace. Try that first 10 questions in 10 minutes rule to bank time for the harder ones later. But if you're drilling a mixed set of 20 sufficient assumption questions, don't time that. The difficulty levels are going to be all over the place. You're better off mastering the skill first, then applying it under pressure. Cramming timing into everything just creates anxiety without giving you useful feedback.
Would you recommend that I do the higher numbered prep tests? Because there's not like that many, and I've been doing a lot of drills, so I feel like it's been getting rid of a lot of prep tests. So what would you recommend with that? Like, should I just keep like some open, like untouched?
Yeah, so I would recommend saving a handful of the most recent ones to do as full-length exams in the lead up to test day. Okay. So if you have 10 weeks till your exam, say you might want to save the exams in the 150s, or maybe a mix of the 140s and 150s if necessary, so that you're doing one of those a week over the next 10 weeks.
Okay.
And I'm saying 140s and 150s because those are the newest. And then the older ones, anything prior to the 140s, you could do as individual sections or drill sets, what have you. Any of that's totally fine.
Okay. Yeah, because I'm worried that I'll run out of tests.
Yeah, I mean, well, there's almost 60 of them as full exams. And so you just want to make sure that you maintain a 10 or 12 or so untouched so that you can use those to measure yourself.
How do I figure out because if I get a question wrong, I go through each question saying the answer that I picked and then why it was wrong, why I thought it was correct, like the Socratic method that you guys showed. But how do I figure out how to fix what I keep doing over and over again?
Well, first, I mean, you have your coaching sessions every week, so I would talk about those questions with your coach. Your coach can help you better articulate and extract the takeaway from your analysis of that question. And then I'd be looking, okay, well, where did I go wrong? Which trick or trap did I fall for in this case? Was it a misread of the stimulus? Was it misinterpreting the question type? Was it a particular trap in terms of attempting wrong answer or an unappealing right answer? And so whatever the mistake was, you want to articulate it clearly so that next time you go into a section or a drill set or a full exam, you'll be primed to avoid making the same mistake again.
That's also something I didn't do for when I was on the other tutoring website. I never really reviewed what I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, review is key.
Yeah.
Here's one of the best questions I get from students. How do I stop making the same mistakes over and over again? The answer is deceptively simple. You need to go beyond what you got wrong and figure out why you got it wrong. Was it a misread of the stimulus? A question type confusion? A trap answer that you always fall for? The Socratic review method is designed to surface those exact patterns. But don't stop at the review doc. Take what you learned and talk it out with a coach, with a peer, or even out loud to yourself. The faster you can label the pattern, the faster you can fix it. That's what separates people who plateau from the ones who can break through. So let's recap your game plan then. So we talked about reading comp, sufficient assumption, and must be true, right? So for reading comp, we talked about crystallizing the main idea, being super clear on that. What is the author's opinion? What's the main point? If they could leave you with only one central idea, what would that be? You might want to jot that down in a few key words on your scratch paper. We talked about maybe not using the highlighting tool because it's a bit glitchy, and feeling free and comfortable to go back to the passage when you need to solve more of the evidence and detail-oriented questions. This could save you some time because you're not getting bogged down and stuck during your initial read, trying to hold all of that in your head. Then we talked about sufficient assumption questions, what they are, the proper perspective, and diagramming on them. Diagramming is okay. It's a tool. You can use it in certain cases. Sufficient assumption and must be true are two of the only types where that might actually be a reasonable approach. And especially for now, because you have 10 weeks, it's okay to diagram. But over time, as test day gets closer, you're going to want to diagram less and less. You still can, but you might only want to reserve it for maybe 3-4 questions. But in the meantime, using diagramming as a tool to better articulate your understanding of the stimulus is a valuable strategy. And I think that if you combine all of these, if you refine your reading comp approach more, if you get better at distinguishing sufficient versus necessary conditions, not reversing them, and being more clear on your mapping of the stimulus, you're going to get those score increases on the way to 170. Awesome, Lee. It was a pleasure. Before we sign off, what would you say is the biggest insight you got from our call today?
Being able to go back to the passage is not like that, being not like a detrimental thing was helpful to hear. That'll calm my nerves a little.